Hello. I wanted to send you into the weekend with another morning cup of cow shit, except it's not morning and this certainly isn't coffee. I'm going to continue the theme of the Saints of Point Reyes. This will be the Saints of Point Reyes Part 2. In the last one, I talked about how this misconception of the ranchers helping create the seashore was complete and utter rubbish. And now we come to another one of the obstacles I ran into in making the film, in this idea that, oh, the poor ranchers, but what about the ranchers? How are we going to help the ranchers? What's to become of the ranchers? This is a very common reaction from people, and I tried to be patient with it for the first couple of years, but at this point it's just annoying because what are you people doing the rest of the year? Are you all out on humanitarian campaigns? No, you're not. But suddenly, when the idea of ranchers getting kicked out of a seashore where they were already paid to leave the seashore and all the animals in the seashore are suffering by their presence. In fact, now we're going to kill wildlife in the seashore because of their presence. Suddenly you're like, but the farmers. What are you talking about? Do you even know what you're talking about? I mean, people act like the ranchers are out there working around the clock on the cure for cancer or something, or they're all putting their heads together to figure out how to solve world hunger. No, that's not what's happening out there. Not even close. In a recent post, I showed how in the 1961 congressional testimony, the lawyer for the ranchers was pointing out how much money was going to be lost just from losing the veal production coming out of Point Reyes National Seashore and extra beef production from all the dairy cows who, once their bodies had just collapsed from constantly being forced into overproduction of milk while having their babies stolen from them every time they give birth. At the end of all that, they also contribute to beef. So all this wonderful, saintly, economic contributions coming from the seashore. How can we part ways with such a wonderful, proud tradition? Which brings me to the next point. The reason this is continuing, such horrific practices is continuing, is based on this line. My daddy did it, and his daddy did it. It's shit. It's disgusting. It's a terrible tradition. It's a terrible culture. It should have never existed, much less been allowed to continue for this long. But they're struggling. They're just trying to make their way in the world. Are you sure about that? Are you sure about that? Out of all these ranching families who lease ranches in the seashore, who also own their own ranches on massive estates outside of the seashore throughout Marin County, today we're going to look at one in particular. This family has been very vocal about getting rid of the elk. This family has been very vocal about how the presence of the elk is going to make or break their business. The elk are just cutting into their profits to the point that they just have to be gotten rid of. I don't want to say the name of the family, but they lease C Ranch and D Ranch, and it rhymes with Spalletta. Quickly, since I mentioned D Ranch, let me point out that when the original tenants of D Ranch left the seashore, this was supposed to have been returned to wilderness. Instead, miraculously, the Spallettas of C Ranch got to start leasing D Ranch as well. Now, the Spallettas also own ranches up here outside of the seashore and here outside of the seashore, as well as over here outside of the seashore. This one caught my eye because as you drive on this road, you see the real estate sign, and if you look it up, you find out that this particular Spalletta property is for sale for $6.5 million. And that's just the property under the Spalletta name. But if you consider that by marriage, the Spallettas are also the Grossi family, then they own an absolutely massive portion of Marin County. Now, I've been working on this project for a while, so when I go through documents from the past, such as interviews in the Point Reyes Light or documents that were acquired through the Freedom of Information Act, the Spalletta name comes up pretty often, usually regarding elk, getting rid of the elk. The constant but unsubstantiated complaints from families such as the Spoletas have led the Park Service to reimburse the ranchers, to repair rancher fences, to offer them tools and supplies, and to do everything they can, including harassing the elk away from ranch land. Yes, your own Park Service actually harasses the elk when the ranchers aren't harassing the elk, which they do. And it's all in the FOIA documents. So don't call me some crazy conspiracy theorist. It's in writing. But what's really crazy is that no proof was ever needed to back up the claims of these ranchers. In fact, they've gone so far as to say that the elk kill the cattle. A few things on that really quick. Radio collar data shows that the elk leave the area when cattle approach. It is the elk who are displaced by cattle, not the cattle being displaced by elk. Now, the park doesn't actually employ any elk experts, which is weird considering what a rare opportunity it is to study that population in a national park. I, on the other hand, have interviewed Judd Howell, who has a PhD in wildlife biology and who conducted a study on the Tule elk in Point Reyes. And I've also interviewed Julie Phillips, who is a professor and has followed and studied Tule elk in California for 30 years. Both of them said, I've never heard of anything like elk killing cattle. But imagine it, just imagine it for a minute. An elk killing a cow. Kind of a gory aftermath, right? You got some pretty nasty evidence there to substantiate your argument. Yet none exists. But forget the killing of the cattle. Let's go back to the first excuse about why we're getting rid of elk. They eat too much grass, which is just absurd. I mean, even if the elk ate a lot of grass, too bad. You're ranching at a discounted rate on land that doesn't belong to you in a national seashore. As far as everyone should be concerned, the elk should be allowed to eat as much grass as they want. But think about the fact that the Park Service did no studies and did nothing to actually try to quantify how badly the ranchers were suffering from the impacts of the elk before they said, sure, okay, we'll kill the elk. We'll kill this endemic species. Not because there's any proof or a great argument, but because you, the ranchers, asked for it. And who asked for it the most? We're back to the Spoletas. Now, I'm going to get to the Freedom of Information Act documents in a moment, but let's go back to the core reason that we're talking about this. The poor, wonderful, good-hearted ranchers just trying to make a living. Yes, these wonderful people are so kind that they can't tolerate the privilege of having a rare, endemic, magnificent animal grazing through pastoral lands. I would like to think that a nice rancher would be happy with something like that and could manage to find a way to live with it. But then you're going to bring up, you know what, economics is economics, you know? Those elk apparently are just eating too much grass. But back to the poor Spoleta family struggling to get by while they own 3 massive properties outside of the seashore while being able to afford to lease 2 within the seashore. I sure hope they get all $6.5 million on the one they're currently trying to sell. You know what? Why aren't you willing to give up the one in the seashore if you're in the market of needing to sell a dairy? Because everyone's begging you to sell one, and you wouldn't have to kill an endemic species and continue to pollute a national park. But no, let's go make our money outside the seashore because we're getting a discounted rate from the government inside the seashore that we already got paid to leave. And let's not forget the conservation easements that all of these ranching families receive. Basically, multi-million-dollar bonuses to continue doing what they're already doing. If we look at just one of the Spoleta properties, this one has been owned by the Spoleta family since 1932, but in 2009, Malt decided that they needed $2.5 million to encourage them to continue ranching.
Quote, this is an example of how Malt works with ranching families to find a conservation alternative to the sale of the land. Well, gee, I hope this isn't the same property that's currently for sale. Marin Agricultural Land Trust was investigated for conflict of interest earlier this year, but whether or not you think they are legit or corrupt, bottom line is they're giving out millions of dollars to these poor, struggling ranchers with multiple properties.
Look, you can love ranchers and the ranching lifestyle and just keep your head in the sand and pretend that we've got to eat milk and the lactations of a bovine for our nutritional needs. But regardless, stop pretending like something great is happening out there. They are stealing babies from their mothers, sending the baby males straight to slaughter or auctioning them off for veal, which means, which one's worse? Just getting slaughtered within days of entering the earth or having to live a life where you can't move because humans want to consume undeveloped baby flesh? As messed up as that is, don't miss the underlying theme here of we have to feed people. Is that how you go about feeding people? Providing a weird delicacy of undeveloped baby flesh? Stop pretending that ranching is a good thing. It is a direct conflict with Mother Nature. Stop pretending that those animals want to be there. Stop pretending that those animals wouldn't leave the moment they had a chance to if that chance was given to them. But it's an American way of life. It's cultural. What about the American tradition of contributing to the greater good, of realizing when your time is up and that it's time to adapt and move on for the sake of your country and for the sake of the planet? Dairies and beef farmers are a drain on the economy. How can I say that more clearly? They do not boost the economy. We pay for them through our tax dollars, and then we pay them again with the most expensive food you can find on the market. And it's only at that price because the government helps lower the price. And all it costs is the decimation of our California coastal grassland, of our coastal prairies, of our native habitat, of our clean water. So I finally did today's post because this morning a friend of mine, an environmental attorney, took some photographs of the new fencing going up out at Point Reyes that, once again, instead of being wildlife friendly, how long does this national seashore have to exist before the staff get with it and start putting in wildlife friendly fencing, even if they want to continue with a ridiculous commercial business of ranching? Why can't they put in wildlife-friendly fencing? But in addition to pointing out that they're putting in more barbed wire, brand new barbed wire, that we, the taxpayers, fit the bill for, he also pointed out that in the past, when the park tried to do something good by putting in a little section of fence where the elk and other wildlife could jump over without snagging their back legs and breaking their necks as they try and jump over it, or ripping their legs open and just hanging there, dying. When the Park Service tried to do that, Sea Ranch, also known as the Splettas, came in and added their own barbed wire across the top of it, thus ending anything good that might have resulted in the park's efforts. Did the park punish them? No. Did the park take that wire down? No. Wow. Did the park get any proof from them that the elk were eating a significant amount of the feed for the cows? No. Did the park actually manage to get evidence that elk damaged the ranchers' fences? No. Did the park get evidence that elk killed cows? No. Is the park happy to comply with whatever the ranchers want anyway? Yes. And this is what you people are supporting when you blindly say, oh, but the poor ranchers.
Oh, is that why the Spoletas were forced to sell that one property for $6.5 million because of the elk eating grass? They're like, oh man, we gotta cover the costs somewhere. I guess we have to sell a ranch. What is that amount anyway? Have you thought about that? Let's pretend that the Park Service did their due diligence and actually studied this problem before making the decision to kill the elk. What would your number be? What is the amount of hay or grass or water or broken fences that were never proven? What would the number be when you say, yep, time to kill the native animals to protect this commercial business operating inside of the National Seashore?